Okay, so all I've done so far is I've done create React app. I'm calling my app Flixie. All I've done is open Visual Studio Code. So what IDE are people using? So actually, I don't care, because I think you should all use Visual Studio Code. It'll make your life easier, I think. So let me just start out with a couple of reasons, a couple of things I like about it, and a couple of things I use. I'm not a heavy IDE power user, so I used to be a big, like, a Sublime or very basic user, but I've started to like this a lot. One nice thing is a command line option to go here. So you can just type code and dot for current directory. It'll open. To install that, you do Command Shift P. You can type in install code command in path. So that's a pro tip I think that you guys should use. There's also a debugger built into it. So on the course portal, I have some instructions on how to set up debugging properly. Let's see, it's in, sorry, this is the iOS class. It's here. So there's a README section here. If you follow these instructions, you'll be able to do debugging via React Native. The way that works is you just hit start debugging, choose Chrome. Oh, I need to actually set these settings. Open your window. It's not working. I think I stopped the server. And the next thing you can do here is then you can start setting breakpoints and things and hit reload to reload the app. But we can do breakpoints like you can say, I don't know what's happened to X. You click here, and the little red circle means breakpoint. Click on reload. It should pause there. Sometimes it doesn't actually. Oh, I just turn off. So stop here, and you can look at local variables and things. It's a very useful feature, if you ask me. So I'll keep that on. So let's go back here. Let's go back to the assignment. Here. Let's see. So I want to view a list of movies currently playing. That's what we're going to kind of build this around. So I'll just start doing that. So that API is documented here. It's very easy. You have to register an API key. Anyone can get one. But here's a sample request. Please don't use this API. This is my API key. If everyone starts using this, we'll get blocked. Please just get your own. But this is what the API returns. It's just a set of data. So one way I actually like to get started is when I'm debugging, I don't want to call the API over and over again because it's slow and inefficient. So I like to just save a copy locally. I'll do that first. A new file here, it's called test.json. And I'll paste that code into here. In here, I'll just do const So actually, I used const here. So in the pre-work example, I used a lot of let. Does anyone know the difference between let and const?
You can't change them.
Okay. So what should we use? Is there a preference in what we should do? Does it really matter? The answer here is, I mean, if you want to be very strict, I would say most people recommend you should use const when you can. So it's a smidgen faster, but also will kind of help you make fewer mistakes. Is probably the better benefit. So every time you use const, you shouldn't be changing variables a lot anyway. So generally speaking, use const, and if it turns out you need to change something, then you change it to let. The idea is you shouldn't use var anymore. So var is from an older version of JavaScript. With very, very few exceptions, if you ever come across code online where the person uses var for things, just replace those vars with let. With very few exceptions. But don't use var. Don't use var if you can avoid it. So say const movies equals I actually don't remember. So I had this whole JSON here, but I want to see it here. So actually what I can do is I can set a breakpoint. Reload. And then I can see what does movies look like. It's a little bit small. It has dates, pages, total results. But what looks like we want is this results member. Has length of 20. Has 20 things in it. So actually, I want some test data. That's what makes sense. And then I know I need this breakpoint. Now. Sorry, I'm trying to can't see my screen. So, one cool thing is I made a logo online for this app. So instead of this logo, import logo from what have I done? It's not a cool logo. I don't want that rotation. Does anyone know why it's rotating by default? This is just in the boilerplate. So in this app CSS file, there is a spin infinite music. We'll talk more about this in a second, but hopefully most people are familiar with the concept of CSS. That's how you do the styling. In React, it can be a little bit confusing because there's 3 or 4 different ways to organize your styles. For us, we'll just go the most basic route, which I'll show you in just a second, which is basically just doing regular CSS. And then during the break, I installed something called Bloomer. So this is a library I like to use. So it's called bloomerjs.org. It's a React version of Bulma. So in the pre-work, you guys used React Bulma. Since then, I've discovered this new library. So about JavaScript, you'll find a new library like every day. There's so many. Did I type that wrong? Oh, bloomer.js.org. Sorry. And the way you install it is npm install bloomer, and then you import bulma.css, and then you import the things you need from Bloomer. Here, I want container. I'm just going to wrap this whole app in what's called a container. So I also really like keeping the style up to date. So I did leave a comment on many of your pre-works saying you should kind of organize your code and make it very clean. The easiest way is it's hard to keep track of all the rules in JavaScript. Actually, if you just saw what I did, actually, I just typed that. Double quotes or single quotes, there's lots of inconsistencies you can have. They're kind of the mark of a not experienced programmer. It's kind of like making spelling errors if you're trying to write a letter or something. So what I installed here is an extension called Prettier. You saw that it's a opinionated code formatter. It's kind of what Facebook recommends. If you do that in Visual Studio Code, when you hit Command-Shift-P, you'll have something called Format Documents. Hit this, and it just magically makes all your code consistently formatted. So I use this constantly. So you can see I actually changed the single quotes to double quotes there. Okay, and also it'll do an indentation for you. So okay, so here let's change this. So what I want here is a movie list. So let's do another container. Let's do movie list. So I'll make a new component called movie list that contains all my movies. I want to create, and I want to make a new component called movie. So let's import movie. And I'll make that file here. Thank you. Move E list. What happened?
Try just doing the full .jsx.
Are you creating the right file? Yeah, okay.
No. Oh yeah, also you may want to export something.
Oh, yeah. So this file, there's lots of like React import, export stuff. So I always forget that boilerplate as well. So another good extension to use is I like this one called React Redux React Router snippets. There's many packages like this available for Visual Studio Code, but these just give you a nice autocomplete. So I'll show you what I mean by going here. Let me move this debug thing. So I can just type RCC, and it fills in all the boilerplate for me. So I want to call this movie list. I don't have any quotes here. Sorry, this is regular code. Hopefully I'll have, no, what did I do wrong? I didn't want to open that file. Movies assigned by movie list, movies. Okay, so this is the movie list. But we want a little bit more than that, so we're passing the movies. So we'll say const. This is just shorthand I like. There's another way to write this. These are two equivalent statements. The second one's a little bit cooler. If you have multiple things here, so imagine we had other props. We could do this instead. So you'll see this syntax a lot. We'll use it. And then we'll do. Formatted my code a little bit funny, but so this is a very common pattern as well in React. So you saw this a lot in the pre-work. It's map. So map means use it on a collection or a list. So for every movie in movies, return whatever this is. In this case, it's going to be what I haven't defined it yet, but a movie card for each movie. So then we'll make a new component called movie card.
I have a very basic question.
Yes.
We've used this props a bunch in the keyword, I'm
Yeah.
still not quite sure what exactly this props. Like, what's the point of this?
That's a good question.
Like,
So every component has something that's called props. So you can pass in anything you like to any component can take as many arguments as you want, and each one's called a prop. So, for example, here we passed in one prop of this movie list, which is movies. But we could have done lots of other things, like we could set a color equals black, columns equals 2, you have this 2, squishy equals false, something.
Each of those is a property.
Each of these is a props. So when you're in the component where you're writing code inside movie list, this dot props will be a JavaScript object that has color black, movies this, squishy false. And you can pass in anything as a prop, any like legal JavaScript thing. So here it can be a movie is an array, color is a string, column is a number, or you can also pass in functions like we did in the pre-work. So handle tweet, handle like, handle delete. You can also pass those as properties as well.
so the this props in movie list is just telling it, hey, you're actually props for the main.
What your parent passed, whoever made you, whoever initialized you, they gave you these initial properties.
Alright.
It's like Oscar, your properties would be like name Oscar, name equals Oscar, skills equals JavaScript, things like that. The reason why you do this is so you can have different components with different types of behaviors, I guess. Like I could write a generic movie list component that sometimes that has a configured number of components, instead of making a component called like 2-column movie lists and having a different one called 3-column movie list. I can just make it a property of how many columns it has. That was maybe an okay example.
That's cool. You can think of a component now as a function that takes in these props as arguments and returns a piece of HTML.
Where was I? So I want to make a new component called movie.art.jsx. By the way, I'm doing all this in source. In production code, it's a little bit more common to make a new folder called components here. So you have components, and all your components can live in a components folder. Or you might even break it up farther, depends on your app. For the first homework at least, you'll find just throwing it all in source. I won't get mad at you. So, yeah, and we'll import box from Loomer. And we'll do return box movie. So now we have a box for everything, and we have the title from all of our movies.
So I don't have to import the movie list into the other component.
No, so
It can access it through.
yeah, this is important. So movie card has no idea about anything about it. So it's movie card just like, hey, what do I care about? My props. I know my movie data. That's all it knows. It doesn't know if it's in a list. It doesn't know if it's in a grid. It doesn't know if it's floating in space somewhere. And that's the whole idea, is that your code has to be very able to be run independently in different places. So actually later, people even made this thing that if you worked at a big company, you would use a style book. So you could even build something like this for your company, where this is what buttons look like. And they're not living in an app anywhere, they're just like isolated, but they can still do all the cool things that they would normally do in this context. And it's very important for your code to be independent like that. That way, if you change one thing here, you don't break something like 10 levels away, which is something that happens pretty frequently in code today.
Arguably, not to nitpick or anything, you probably don't even want to pass in movie at this point. You just want to pass in the title.
That's true.
Technically.
Yes, that's true. We could do that.
But I think you want to render more things later on
Now let's do
which
that.
is important to pass. So it's important to pass the movie, but
No,
you
no,
basically
no,
don't
no,
want.
No, let's do it your way.
Okay. But yeah, you basically don't want to have any kind of logic extracting title from the movie object.
Right.
You want that logic to live somewhere else.
Actually, it's a good point, especially because in our API, if you read your API, let me just pull up this JSON. Where did I put it? What's it called? Test.json. It's hard to read, but there's actually two fields here: original title and regular title. So for foreign movies in this API, they have the foreign language title, but the regular title field is in English. So there is logic here. You don't want your movie card to know that. You want someone else to do that, or maybe you do. I don't know. It's up to you. But yes, so this is the best way to do it. Thank you, Jaren. So we have a title. Now, so this is a pretty ugly little app we built here. I know how one way to make it look very beautiful. We can add some color. So I need to know people's names. So is it Bun? What is your favorite color? Yeah. Purple? Okay. So we can do, just like in HTML, we can add inline styles. You just kind of do it a little bit JavaScript-y. You pass a JavaScript object instead of a string. So we'll say color, or background color, purple. Does not work. Style. There we go, sorry, style. Now everything is purple. Very beautiful. But this is a coding question, so depending, you have to use your judgment here. This is a little bit frowned upon in code. For simple components, this is okay. But if you have something a little bit more complex, or particularly if you're working with a designer in your team that doesn't really know how to write code, but does know CSS, it's probably better to instead do things the way you may be familiar with in HTML. You use something called class name, and just pass a string here. We'll call this movie card box. Oops. And we'll do import. Let's call it movie card.css. And we'll make a new file called movie card.css. And it's not very interesting, but movie card box. And then you can write regular CSS as well. Before we actually had to JavaScript convert the CSS writing style to JavaScript. No.
What would be actually the tag? Because it's not a bit. What can you actually use the movie card? No, right?
Wait, no, I have to focus. I don't like that purple.
Movie card is replaced by whatever is in the render function of the movie card. So movie card never makes it to the actual HTML.
Yes, it becomes a div.
So if you wanted to use the tag here,
Let me see what it's saying.
Oh, yeah, you generally don't want to do that.
you don't want to do it.
Although if you have like other things within movie card, like say you have a div within there or like a span in there, you can use that.
I would kind of, so anyone who's written CSS kind of realizes that CSS is difficult. So you'll also see one thing I did here, which is a bit of a hack, which I gave the class name. I prefixed it with the name of the component. So that's just a way for me to keep all my styles separate. So movie card box, because everything in CSS is global. So if I had done this, I just called it box, and then said box here, that would have overwritten the styles for every box in my entire app. That's probably not what you want.
So the import is global.
It's global, yeah. It's always global in CSS. There are solutions for this in React, but they're too complicated, and I don't think most of the time it's not worth it, I would say. And also doesn't work with Create React App. There's something called CSS modules, which if you're interested, you can look up.
Sorry,
Yes.
can I have a look back at the release of JSON?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I changed it to blue because that purple was too ugly. Fun. Now it's very beautiful. Sorry, I don't like that. formatting is not. Okay. What else was going to do? Let's see.
Should start the recording in 24 minutes.
Oh, I'm almost done. Oh, basically. Okay, you're right. Yeah, Steve's gonna yell at me if I screw this up.